Hello, and today we are making a baked Alaska. I started by plastic wrapping my 3 quarts bowl, or 2.8 liters. We're then going to grab our ice cream of choice. We had chocolate vanilla in our freezer, so that's what I used. I used an ice cream scooper tool that they would use at the restaurants to scoop my ice cream. And all I'm really doing is just taking scoops of vanilla or chocolate, putting them in the bowl, and slowly smushing it down to form no air bubbles and create a solid bowl of ice cream. The recipe does say to leave the ice cream softened, but I was impatient and didn't let it do it. That's why it was a bit more of a struggle. But something that you can do that might help is run the metal part of the ice cream scooper or spoon that you're using and to get the ice cream to soften on touch. The recipe says to use about 8 cups of ice cream, but I didn't want to measure it, so I didn't, and I just used the rest of what we had for ice cream. Once it's done, we let it sit for a couple minutes just to fully soften, and while that was going on, I had a little ice cream snack myself just to pass the time and because there was a little bit left over that I could enjoy. I then started to flatten it down with a spatula, which I found was a big mistake. It was really hard, and the ice cream would stick to the spatula, lifting up and creating annoying things in the ice cream, and it frustrated me a little bit. But I kept going because I was stubborn. But eventually, it frustrated me too much, and I ran the ice cream scooper under hot water to smoothen and flatten it. I also noticed when I was flattening it, it got quite a bit smaller, so I added a little bit more ice cream just to give it a little bit more layer to it. Every now and then I would look at the bottom of the bowl just to make sure there were no gaps because we didn't want any gaps for the next following steps afterwards. This is where I gave up on the spatula because it was sticking too much, and this is me running the ice cream scooper under hot water to make it warm enough that the ice cream will melt when coming into contact with it. You can see immediately that it worked a lot better and immediately flattened the ice cream without sticking to it. And I did leave the stuck ice cream on the spatula for me to eat later. You put that We're going to put that aside for a while, and I'm going to clean my surface, and we're going to take our pound cake. We had store-bought this time, but for doing this next time, I would absolutely make it homemade. I take out a cutting board and a knife and cut the uneven top layer off of the pound cake because there are already scores in it. I then cut the remaining layer into a really messy half, but that's okay, we don't need it to be clean, and lay one of the half right on top of the ice cream. Cut the other into 2 strips and lay them on either side of that, and then take the remaining uneven pieces and rip it into smaller pieces to fill in the extra layers along the outside to make sure there is one layer of pound cake around the bottom. As you can see, there was a full layer on the bottom, and the recipe says you can freeze this for up to 3 hours or up to 3 months, but we're just going to freeze it overnight because I did this step on one day and I was going to finish it off the next day when we had company. But for now, we're going to put layers of plastic wrap over it so it can freeze properly and preserve in the freezer until the next day. I'm gonna make space in the freezer for it, put it down, and make sure nothing's resting on top of it, and we're good to go. This is day 2. We're gonna start out with a medium bowl and our hand mixer. We are then going to get a separate bowl because we need 6 egg whites but no yolks. So this is me separating the yolks and whites by hand. I accidentally got a couple drops of yolk in the white, but I didn't have enough energy to care about it right then and there. I'm then going to throw the shells out and rinse my hands to get the egg off them, but also because the eggs were really, really cold. Dry my hands, and now we have our egg whites. I'm going to clean up around the table a little bit because I spilled a little bit of egg white around it. We are then going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar powder to help with the eggs. I'm not really sure what it does to the egg whites, but it's supposed to help them mix better while turning them into the meringue. We are going to mix this for about 3 minutes. You want to mix this, or until it's about a foamy consistency. This took me a little bit longer just because my hand mixer is a little different, and it could possibly be the egg yolk that fell into it, but I doubt it would be that. I did stick to the time, maybe just a little bit longer, until I got the consistency I thought foamy was. Before this, it would be best to set aside 3/4 cups of granulated sugar in a separate bowl, or have the container open and the measuring cup ready to gradually sprinkle in over time as I start doing now. It's best to sprinkle it away from where the mixers are so it doesn't spray all over the counter like I did with mine, but just add it in as gradually as you want, as much as you want. I find probably doing it slower would be better, but again, I'm impatient, and there was a hockey game going on in the background, so tensions were high. Here I made, I think, what might have been a mistake and stopped beating the meringue, which might have been why later I did not achieve the stiff peaks I originally wanted to, but it could have been something else. But after I finished adding all my sugar, I was told the recipe said to beat until stiff peaks form, but I never really ended up with stiff peaks. Mine were more floppy, a little flat. It could be with the measuring, something else, but I never really got the stiff peaks I wanted. And I was worried it was because of the bowl and I wasn't mixing it around properly. Every now and then I'd lift up the whisk to test if the peaks were stiff, but they were just like really droopy and floppy and not as light as a meringue should be. It was around this point I started to get frustrated and worried that the meringue wasn't going to turn out and I had ruined the whole thing by something I didn't even know what I did. I kept testing it, but the consistency was just never changing, and so I just continued mixing and mixing, and I was starting to feel discouraged with the recipe, worrying I had ruined it and all the ingredients and the time I had taken so far. I then switched to a bigger bowl so I could mix it around more thoroughly because I believe that it might help with it. In the end, it did help a little bit, but not as much as it would have needed to achieve the proper um, stiff peaks needed for this recipe. But I just kept on going, trying to help. I was telling my dad about it. Um, he didn't have much experience baking, but he had experience cooking, and there were two Australians in the room who grew up making pavlova down in their childhood in Australia. So they had a little more familiarity with meringue, and they told me to just keep going and see where it ended up. But eventually, my dad came over, tried mixing for a bit, but then eventually told me to just go with it and see if it worked out. And so I did after a little bit. After I got the good enough consistency, I poured it all onto the cake or the ice cream pound cake mixture we had made earlier, took it out of the bowl with the plastic wrap we had lined before. Lathered it with a spatula and made gentle tapping motions with the spatula to get the little peaks in the meringue. Um, and after I did that, I tried making space in the freezer for it, but with the baking sheet it was on, it was too big and wasn't fitting in my freezer in any way I tried, and it was really starting to frustrate me. The parchment ripped and I got really upset. I got meringue in the freezer and I was just getting really angry with it. I did fix the meringue and redid the little pats, smoothed it out, and was getting ready to try again despite everything that had gone wrong so far. I was feeling really upset and discouraged and just really angry with this recipe. Um, this recipe isn't really the easiest. Meringue isn't something that's easy to do. It was really, really easy to mess up, but I kind of just settled with the good enough because I didn't have the energy or ingredients to try it again. At one point, I started looking for another pan to put it on because I knew that pan wouldn't fit in the freezer, and so I eventually asked my mom to come help me to try do it. And we ended up putting it on a square cooking pan that's used on the stove because it fit better. The square fit the circle perfectly on it, so we transferred it onto after we had one more go at putting the big pan in the freezer. But it wouldn't work out again. The parchment paper on the baking pan also kept sliding, which made me really worried because I didn't want it to fall off and ruin it and also make a big mess in the freezer. After we put it onto a square pan, we got it safely in the fridge and we were told to let that sit for minimum 1 hour, but we could let it sit for up to 24 hours. And at this point, I started doing the dishes and just cleaning up while it was in the oven. Partway through the dessert being in the freezer, we only had it in there for about an hour, maybe closer to 2 hours because we were going to have dinner, and then it's right after dinner we were going to put it in the oven and then get ready for serving. Because as soon as you bake this, it's time to get ready. While I was doing dishes, we preheated the oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we put it in for 4 minutes. And during that time, we took an active shot, and you could see the meringue starting to brown in the oven. Partway through, I did turn it around because I noticed the back getting more brown and the front wasn't getting brown at all, so I turned it around to give it a little more chance to do it a little more evenly through. It probably would have been fine if I just left it, but I felt like that would have been better. After it was out of the oven, we had my dad get a blowtorch from the garage and give it a little extra toast on the outside. I was going to do this, but I didn't trust myself with this industrial blowtorch that's meant for like fixing things and not a mini kitchen one that bakers would have. It also didn't help that I started freaking out when my dad set the parchment paper on fire, but he didn't freak out. We then cut the meringue, which was really cool because you could feel the light puffiness of the meringue and then the solidness of the ice cream when cutting through. It was quite hard because the ice cream felt like a brick compared to the meringue, but the layering inside looked really nice. The meringue kind of melted off, but it still tasted really good, and all of my family really enjoyed it. I ended up rating this dish about an 8 out of 10 for making, but 10 out of 10 for taste. 8 out of 10 for making because it's a very time consuming process and there's a lot of waiting involved. And meringue isn't an easy thing, especially for beginners, like I mentioned. If I had more experience with meringue, it probably would have gone a little better. This one didn't go so well because that was my first experience with meringue, And 10 out of 10 for taste, because the ice cream, it's just kind of ice cream. And the pound cake, even though it was in the freezer and then put in the oven right after that, it was still really moist and had a nice rich flavor, which I really enjoyed. And the meringue was like, I think it probably should have been done a little differently, because ours was really, really soft on the inside and not that usual crunch you would get from a meringue. I didn't really find that, but despite that, it was still absolutely delicious, and it was a 10 out of 10, would make again, maybe with more experience with meringue. But thank you so much for watching and listening, and I hope you make this dish for yourself. All right, goodbye.